Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. My last video about Biden got a whole bunch of views, so I think I'm going to start grifting towards the right. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe. No, I'm just kidding. People cannot agree on whether the US should spend less on the military. Some say the Pentagon is a giant money vacuum, sucking cash away from schools, healthcare, and everything fun. Others say the spending is the only thing stopping dictators, terrorists, and random chaos from wrecking the world. So, what's actually true? This isn't really about good versus bad. It is about how US military spending works and who it helps or hurts. By the end, you'll understand why people disagree and where you might land. I mean, they even say the US spends $1 trillion dollars on defense, but at this point, I'm pretty sure the defense is just a giant PowerPoint explaining why we need to spend this $1 trillion. Anyways, why people like high military spending. At its core, US military spending is supposed to buy safety, power, and predictability in a very messy world. World military spending was around $2.7 trillion in 2024. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute and the US, alone spent about $997 billion and roughly 37% of that total. To supporters, that huge gap is the point. Spend big so no one else even wants to start a fight. You might notice this logic in how often politicians say the US has to deter Russia, China, Iran, and whoever is on the bad guys of the weak list. The Pentagon's budget is also so big that economists have actually started calling it the national hobby. See, I'm being serious, go look it up. The money does not just vanish into a secret underground bunker. It runs through real towns and real jobs. U.S. national defense cost about $874 billion in 2024, which was roughly 13% of all federal spending, according to the Peterson Foundation. That money flows into shipyards, aircraft carriers, cyber units, military bases, and research labs, and into paychecks for service members and civilians workers. If you live near a big base or a defense plant, you might notice that local restaurants, schools, and housing prices all sort of orbit around that spending. For many communities, cut the military budget basically sounds like cut my job. And we do spend more on defense than the next 9 countries combined, which is either a strong deterrent or proof we do really like to do our homework. High spending also buys a massive global footprint that fans sees as insurance for both America and its friends. The US has an estimated 750 to 800 military bases, sites in around 80 foreign countries and territories, according to the Overseas Base Realignment website. Those include more than 100 sites in Germany, plus dozens in Japan and South Korea, according to the same source, which lets the US respond quickly if something blows up in Europe or Asia. You might notice this when there is a crisis in the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea, and suddenly the news shows US carrier groups protecting sea lanes, so container ships full of your phone, your clothes, and your snacks keep moving. Now, the flip side for the problems with the high military spending. That a giant safety blanket is also a giant line item. In 2024, U.S. defense spending was close to $1 trillion, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, and more than the next several countries combined, according to the Peterson Foundation. Even if it is only around 13% of the federal budget, according to the Peterson Foundation and USA Facts, that is still a lot of money not going to student debt relief, childcare, or fixing collapsing bridges. Critics are not crazy to ask whether the US really needs that much firepower when it has crumbling water systems and rising house costs. Critics say we should take money from the military and spend it on healthcare. Supporters say that would be irresponsible, because how else would we afford the health insurance for the people who make the missiles? There's also the classic problem. Big bureaucracies waste money. And this one is basically the final boss of bureaucracies. The Pentagon has still not passed a full financial audit, according to reporting on government watchdogs summarized by Common Dreams. That does not mean there is a cartoon villain shoveling gold bars into a truck. It means the system is so complex that even the government cannot cleanly track where every dollar goes. This can happen because programs are spread across multiple services, contractors, and decades of legacy systems. You might notice stories about weapons programs that go billions over budget or take years longer than planned and think, if my group project did that, I would have failed the class. And actually, the government can track every social media post you ever liked, but it still can't audit the Pentagon's books because priorities. If you tried to cut the defense budget by just 10%, I also think that contractors would go out of business and start selling their over-engineered toilets to civilians. High spending can also push foreign policy in some sketchy directions. To keep those 750 plus overseas sites running, the US partners with a lot of governments that are not exactly democracy fan clubs. About 38 of the host countries are classified as undemocratic, according to the Overseas Base Realignment website. This can happen because strategic location beats moral discomfort. If a country sits near a key shipping lane or rival power, it gets a base and a security relationship anyway. You might notice this in long-running US ties with authoritarian governments in the Persian Gulf, where selling weapons and basing troops sometimes clashes with stated goals about human rights. The Pentagon's motto at this point should probably be for the safety of our children, and also for the very dedicated, highly paid adults who design that safety. So, how can two reasonable people look at the same facts and walk away with opposite opinions? Start with values. If you care most about avoiding war and keeping the US clearly stronger than any rival, the idea of cutting the military budget can feel reckless. You look at almost $1 trillion and think, expensive, sure, but cheaper than losing a major war. If you care more about healthcare, education, or climate spending, that same number feels like a giant misallocation and not a wise insurance policy. Also, every time there's a debate about military spending, someone says that we must never be weak, while the rest of us are just trying to figure out why our school still has paper towels from 2008. People also bring personal experience. If your family serves in the military, those dollars are not abstract. They are training, gear, pay, and maybe your parents' retirement. You might notice that you trust the military more than any other parts of the government, so giving it money feels fine. If you grew up watching the US invade places like Iraq or Afghanistan and then struggle to fix the mess, you might see high spending as a temptation for leaders to use force too quickly. The same aircraft carrier that looks like security to one person looks like future intervention to another. Even the statistics invite different emotional reactions. Defense takes about 13% of federal spending, according to the Peterson Foundation and USA Facts, which supporters point out is less than what goes to Social Security and health programs. At the same time, the US accounts for nearly 40% of global military spending, according to the Peterson Foundation, using Stockholm International Peace Research Institute data, which critics see as wildly out of proportion. Both of those numbers are real. People just decide which one feels more important. One person zooms in on only part of the budget, the other zooms out to almost half of the world's guns. And if every US dollar was a military spent, it was a tiny soldier, I think we'd have enough to invade every country every year also, just to keep them entertained. So, when you hear the spend less on the military fight, the real questions are, what matters most to you and what trade-off are you okay with. Are you comfortable with the US staying massively ahead militarily, even if that means less money for domestic problems, or would you rather trim that edge to fund things at home? Watch for red flags like fear-based slogans or like we'll be weak or magical thinking that we can cut a ton and nothing will change, instead of honest talk about trade-offs. You do not need someone telling you what to think. You just need to understand how it works. Thank you for watching this video. And if you enjoyed this video, and only if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, as it would help so much. And if you're feeling up to it, maybe just a smidgen, leave a comment, maybe even share, possibly, perchance, who knows. I hope you have a good day, and goodbye. Also, come back to watch another video. Really, bye now.